We would like to welcome excellencies, dignitaries, friends, and advocates of climate justice to this official UN Women and UN CCD side event, Water for Life, Achieving Gender Equality in a Context of the Water Crisis. Here, we'll address the intersecting realm of gender equality, water, and climate change. Thank you all for being here. Thank you also to the participants who are joining us online. It is our pleasure to have you here. My name is Nidia Pesantes, and I am the resident representative of UN Women, as our moderator has said. To the point, almost a third of the world's population does not have access to safely managed drinking water services. Also, around 4 billion people, representing almost two-thirds of the world population, experience severe water shortages for at least 1 month of the year. Women, girls, and boys are the population most affected by the shortages because of the care economy and others situation of vulnerability. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said during Sunday's opening of this World Climate Action Summit, polar ice and glaciers are vanishing before our eyes, causing havoc the world over, from landslides and floods to rising seas. Our planet is in crisis, and this is just one of many symptoms of a broader failure that, as Mr. Guterres has said, is bringing our climate to its knees. We need leadership, cooperation, and political will for action. Women and girls must be engaged and supported. They stand to suffer the most from climate change effects and the depletion of our natural resources. But also, they, women, will stand by finding solutions, as always. The right to water was recognized in 2010 by the United Nations General Assembly as a basic human right, without which the full enjoyment of life and all human rights cannot be realized. Without water, indeed, life itself cannot be realized. Recent elaborations of the human right to safe drinking water have extended the focus from basic access to services to improved water sources that provide sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water. Yet, entrenched discrimination, subjugation, and oppression make women and girls least likely to see this principle fully realized, especially those women from poor and marginalized communities as well as rural territories. Globally, more than 800,000 women lose their lives every year due to insufficient access to water, safe water, sanitization, and hygiene. Research shows that in context of severe and prolonged drought, rates of child marriage increase, and this increase the violence against children, against women, child, girls, and women. We know that a number projected to increase this situation is 674 million in 33 countries by 2050. So we doubled the number now. These struggles underscore the urgent need for a gender-responsive approach to climate action. In Bolivia, for example, indigenous women are cultivating sustainable practices, harnessing ancient wisdom to adapt to a changing climate while safeguarding their cultural heritage and natural resources. They safeguard organic seeds with life, like they used to say. Our seeds are alive. They only need good conditions to grow, to improve, to give us food. As we gather here today, let us draw inspiration from the indomitable spirit of these indigenous women in Bolivia and countless others around the world. Let us commit ourselves to centering gender equality in our climate policies and actions, ensuring inclusivity, equity, and justice for all. Together, we must forge a path that respects and uplifts the voices of women, recognizing their invaluable contributions as agents of change in the fight against climate change effects. Let us commit with life. Let us commit with a new develop model. Let us commit with originary and indigenous people. Let us commit with their knowledge. Thank you very much.
Nydia, thank you so much for those important insights to kick off the event. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our second speaker, who will be discussing the new United in Science 2023 report, Professor Dwiko Rita Karnawati, who is the head of the Indonesia Agency for Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time to sit together with us to share our thoughts. I'm Dwiko Rita Karnawati. I'm one of the women working in meteorology, climatology, and geophysics, and the head of the agency from Indonesia. I would like to highlight the importance of water and climate, the perspective of water and climate with respect to United in Science. Slide, please. Can I show, slide? Yes, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right. If we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, what we would like to for no hunger, as well as the goal number 6, that clean water and sanitation, and the goal number 14, that's life under water, and the climate action as well, the goal number 13, climate action, and goal number 14, that's life underwater, as well as goal number 17, that partnership for the goals. Next slide, please. In the next slide, I would like to highlight the SDGs progress. It is apparent that at the halfway mark to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, only 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on the track. So, indeed, it is far off track from meeting its climate goals. Next slide, please. So, it is necessary to do various things. That the first is close the gaps in weather, climate, and hydrological observation and data. And indeed, in the past, there were quite limited numbers of women works in that field. However, now it seems more and more women involved, and hopefully more and more influence to achieve the sustainable goals, especially with respect to the climate and water, can be more materialized. And the second is we need to advance research and expand access to science, technology, and innovations. Again, the numbers of women in STEMs, in technology and innovations are still limited. Fortunately, it seems more access and opportunity can be provided now, even though we need to work harder. And we also consider it is important to strengthen scientific capacity and skills through education and training with the gender balance, and embrace local, contextual, and indigenous knowledge, as well as unite diverse stakeholders to boost the impact of science. Next slide, please. We would like to highlight the weather, climate, and water perspective for SDGs, it is apparent almost in all goals of the SDG requires consideration on water and climate in order to accelerate the achievement of the goals. Next slide. How is the current conditions related to the climate and air quality? When we talk about the air quality, we must touch the issue of the greenhouse gas. It is apparent that if total CO2 emissions stay at the current level, then this remaining budget would be exhausted before 2030, inexorably leading to the overshoot of 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming. So it is not very nice news, yeah, unfortunately. However, again, we must boost the involvement of women, to be frankly, especially in our environment. The role of women is to make the people wake up, because we like to, like a mom, just we consider other is the children, the kids, so we keep reminding, yeah, and also we work. We give the example, we work together, so hopefully, yes, it could not be achieved in the past, perhaps, because not many yet the women involved. So hopefully by more involvement of women, hopefully they can work more total with care. Yeah, with care, like we care the family, we care the nature. So that's the point. And next slide, please. How is the current condition in surface temperature? Next slide, please. Yes. The years from 2015 to 2022 were the 8 warmest years on record. With recent provision statement of World Meteorological Organization, 2023 will be virtually the highest record of the temperature. So it is according to the data collected from 193 countries and states. So the data indicates that. So every year seems to be the record of the highest temperature. That's not very nice information or news, yeah. And how is the current condition in terms of ocean heat content and cryosphere? Next slide, please. So the upper 2,000-meter depth of the ocean continued to warm in the 2022 and reach the highest heat content on record. It is expected that it will continue to rise irreversible on centennial to millennial time scales. So, and then the next, I would like to highlight regarding the emission target. Next slide, please. Regarding the emission target, yeah, the emission gap to be on track for 1.5 degree target in 2030 remain immense. So again, it is not very nice to let you know. And next slide is about science for climate action. Climate action is imperative in all countries and must be achieved simultaneously with the SDGs. Prioritizing equity, social justice, inclusion, and transition processes can enable adaptation and mitigation while also contributing to sustainable development. And again, cooperation are critical enablers for accelerated climate action, and a global transformation is necessary to move towards a carbon neutral future. Next slide is the SDGs Zero Hunger. We can see here the map showing the red color is the zone with the climate change, which has reduced food security, hindering efforts to meet the SDGs. Next slide is about the weather and climate services. for agriculture, indeed, the weather and climate services can help farmers to understand more about the weather, the climate, to adapt, because the weather and climate, according to most of the farmers, has been changes unpredictably. It's different from what they learn from their ancestor, their fathers, their ancestors. Everything has changed, and they need to understand now how it changed, so they can predict how to adapt or to make a new plan in order to survive the harvest. And next slide, maybe the last slide, we also would like to support by farmer field schools, enhance farmer engagement in climate-informed decision making. So I think that's all that I would like to highlight here. And lastly, early warning for all, early action for all is also very important to materialize the sustainable water access and sustainable development goals. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kanawati, for those comments. It's my pleasure now to introduce pre-recorded remarks from our third speaker, who is Jeanette Azcona, the Senior Research and Data Policy Specialist from UN Women, for an overview of the key findings from UN Women's Gender Snapshot Report, as well as the Spotlight on SDG 6 paper.
My role in this event will be to present some of the findings from our work on the climate and water crisis, particularly understanding its profound impact on women and girls. The shifting climate landscape has brought forth a cascade of meteorological disasters, transforming what once was considered anomalies into a new normal. And it's really important that we look at these issues from a gender perspective. My presentation will unfold in 4 parts. I'll introduce the necessity of a holistic approach to water use and conservation. Following that, I'll delve into the root causes of the global water crisis, influenced significantly, of course, by climate change. I'll then share key findings on the repercussions of the water and climate crisis on women and girls, stressing the urgency of altering our trajectory. The conclusion will highlight the significance of course correction, the need for course correction. My presentation draws on a number of different publications on this topic from UN Women. So you'll see a few of the examples here. I encourage you, if you haven't seen these publications, to seek them out. I'll have a QR code for you at the end of the presentation. And so please have a look. We won't be able to cover all of the material here, but lots of really important insights in these reports. And so do take the time, if you can, to read them in full. That we need a new path forward. But to forge a new path, we need a new way of thinking. Our report, Spotlight on Goal 6, starts by acknowledging the voices of Indigenous women who have long advocated for an integrated approach to natural resource management, one that recognizes the human rights to water, but also respects and defends the rights of nature, including water and water ecosystems, their rights to exist, to thrive, and to regenerate. The moral distinction between water as an extractive resource, often the current mainstream approach, and water as a sacred, common good, with its own independent and immutable rights to exist and flourish, is, as we argue in the report, at the crux of the global water crisis. After all, if you kind of go through this series of questions, and if you identify water as a commodity, which can be purchased, which can be owned, discarded, wasted, you are then, moved into one direction and one trajectory, one that lacks the rights of nature as a framing principle, where water can be used to the point of depletion, where it can be polluted and mismanaged, right? Where the intrinsic rights of these resources are not at the fore, not at the core of the day-to-day kind of planning and managing of these resources. The end result, of course, is a mindset and a lifestyle where consumption is unbridled. This way of thinking takes you blindly in one direction, right? Kind of going in this direction. But imagine if we started with a different premise, one where reciprocity and the duty to maintain a harmonious coexistence with nature are paramount, right? If you went in kind of this direction, where would that take us? And the reality is that it takes you in a very different way. And what we find is that many countries are actually rethinking how they define the rights of nature and how that informs their policies around water, around land, around the protection of our natural resources. Since the mid 2000s, actually, there's been a growing body of ecological jurisprudence focused on the rights of nature and codifying into law protections that reject the idea that water can be exploited, polluted, or damaged in the name of economic development, and instead recognizing the independent rights of glaciers, of rivers, of Mother Earth to exist free from human alteration, pollution, and harm. In Bolivia, for example, since 2010, national statutes have granted nature the right to exist free from human alteration, from pollution, and from the negative effects of mega infrastructure and other projects that would actually cause harm to the ecosystem. Similarly, in India, the highest state courts have built a patchwork of laws recognizing legal personhood, the legal personhood status of glaciers, of rivers, and of other, land and other key natural resources in the country. In total, as of September 2022, 24 countries have formally adopted rights of nature provisions in their legal system. Women at the forefront of these efforts have been vital in bringing about these nascent reforms. Water's centrality to sustainable development is undeniable, yet mismanagement and overconsumption is threatening global water supplies. Over 2 billion people live in water-stressed countries where demand surpasses supply. And integrating gender perspectives into water management remains largely inadequate despite high levels of commitment in this regard. Climate change is making matters worse. And so these two slides together kind of show you what are some of the root causes of what we're seeing across countries in terms of the water crisis. Climate change, lifestyles, and a mindset that at the very least doesn't prioritize conservation and sustainable use of these resources. And frankly, high rates of pollution and mismanagement of these resources. And so kind of an overview of some of these root causes. And of course, the inequality in and the lack of participation sometimes of equal participation of women and women in these decision-making bodies is also another key root cause, where many of these folks who are fighting for the rights of nature, for the human rights of people to have access to clean water, are not given the same seat at the table. And so something, of course, that we cover quite extensively in the report. And what is the kind of the consequence of what we're seeing with these actions? We're seeing that the number of persons exposed to flood-prone areas, for example, has risen by almost a quarter since 2000 due to the fallout from global warming, including the fallout as a result of rainfall, extreme rainfall, rising sea levels, and more intense hurricanes. Globally, 3.7 billion women and girls live in countries facing high or very high exposure to floods. At the other extreme, water scarcity, also exacerbated by climate change, could cost some regions up to 6% of their gross domestic product. Recent projections show that the number of drought days could increase by more than 20% in most of the world by 2080, while the population exposed to these phenomena could grow by around 9 to 17% by 2030, and by around 50 to 90% by 2080. Already, some 37% of the world's female population live in countries with a high or very high exposure to droughts. And so this is the graph here, kind of showing you globally across regions as well. The number of women, the share of women kind of exposed to high or very high probability of experiencing droughts. Same here for tropical cyclones. And so again, kind of showing the real impact that that some of these weather patterns are having on the lives of women and girls. Lack of access to clean water and sanitation disproportionately affects women, exacerbates poverty, food insecurity, and health issues. In 2023, an estimated 380 million women and girls live in countries with high or critical water stress. This number is projected to increase to 471 million by 2030 and to 674 million by 2050. So again, we're going in the wrong direction, right? We're seeing more vulnerability. We're seeing increases in exposure to really quite dangerous shocks, weather shocks. Today, around 1 in every 4 women globally, or 955 million, lack access to safely managed drinking water. The majority of those facing acute deprivations and access to improved water resources are in sub-Saharan Africa, where 39% of women live on less than 2.15 a day. The outlook for sanitation, another key area of Goal 6, is actually even worse. 4 in every 10 women globally lack access to safely managed sanitation. And so this graph, or this infographic, shows you kind of where we are in terms of globally access to safe drinking water, access to safely managed sanitation, and again, the large gaps that remain in meeting these critical global goals. Today, around 1 in every 4 women globally, as I said, experience lack of access to safely managed drinking water. But actually, when you disaggregate the data by other dimensions, you see that actually some groups of women are facing even greater disadvantage here. Based on data, so we looked at data from 93 low and middle income countries, and we looked at the data disaggregated by income and location. We see huge differentials in access to improved water sources, ranging from less than 1%, so 1 percentage point, to as much as 82 percentage points in some cases. The dark gray, so the dark diamond here, is the national average. These here are the urban richest, and these here are women living in kind of the rural poorest households. And as you can see, depending on the country, large and massive inequality even within the same country. And so access oftentimes is really related to kind of one's socioeconomic status in the country, and really important to also highlight how important it is to look at these issues from an intersectional perspective. The impact of water poverty and the growing water crisis on women and girls are multifaceted. and include, for example, more time poverty. When safe drinking water is not available on premises, the burden of water collection and treatment largely falls on women and girls. In Malawi, for example, women without safe drinking water in their households spend on average 54 minutes a day collecting water, much higher numbers in time than their male counterparts. It also impacts income poverty and food insecurity, putting women's livelihood at risk and ultimately threatening some of these basic needs being met. In Niger, for example, where agriculture accounts for over a third of GDP in 2021, nearly 7 in 10 employed women are working in this industry. And of course, weather-related shocks have then a large bearing on their income and on their food insecurity. Ill health is another major negative outcome of some of these challenges that we're talking about today. Every year, an estimated 660,000 women lose their lives prematurely due to unsafe water resources. And every year, 44 million pregnant women are infected with hookworm, which causes maternal anemia and preterm births rather. Greater exposure to violence is another unfortunate correlate of these deprivations. We see higher incidence of domestic violence when water is scarce. And we also see kind of the exacerbation of interstate conflict, conflicts that oftentimes have a real major impact on the well-being of women and girls. And so different forms of violence, tend to be exacerbated when these, critical resources are lacking and really having a major impact on women and girls. And so what we've also done with our research is to not only acknowledge that these things and these challenges are happening now, this is not something happening in the future, but challenges that women are facing today, but to also do some modeling work to try to understand at the current trajectory, or if things worsen in terms of our climate futures, where will we be, 20, 30, 50 years from now? Climate-induced poverty and hunger, we find are projected to surge. Our research suggests that globally, by mid-century, under a worst-case climate scenario, as many as 158 million more women and girls will be pushed into extreme poverty. Food insecurity is also projected to increase by as much as 236 million more women and girls facing food insecurity, not having enough money to buy food for their family and themselves, wondering where their next meal is going to come from, and really struggling to provide. Climate change then, as we see with some of these examples, is really reversing hard-won gains in key kind of global goals. And so real impacts now and in the future unless we take climate action. What is perhaps most concerning is that while investments in development policy strategies are important and can help offset the damages of this kind of worst case climate scenario, the impact of these investments are still less than what could be achieved if the world abates climate change now, before it gets exponentially worse. As you can see from this graph, by 2050, millions will still be pushed into acute poverty and food insecurity, despite the best efforts to mitigate losses and bolster resiliency. And so this is the number that I was showing you earlier in terms of the number of women and girls that will be pushed into poverty as a result of climate change under that kind of worst case scenario. This is the number if we enact policies, kind of a comprehensive package of investments to mitigate and to offset these negative effects. And as you can see, yes, there's a sharp decline, but we still see as many as 43 million more women and girls living in poverty as a result of climate change in this kind of worst case scenario than we would otherwise, right? So this is kind of being pushed into poverty, increases in poverty, and so totally not the right direction that we want to be on these key global goals, and really important to emphasize this. because what it really, I think, tells us is that we need to be doing more. We need to be investing in women and girls, investing in mitigating losses and bolstering resiliency, but also making sure that that we rebalance our priorities, that we heal our planet and change habits and lifestyles that are simply unsustainable. And so climate action is still very much needed, and really important to talk about both, right? To talk about prevention and to talk about what needs to happen now to avoid these kind of worst case scenarios. Our report outlines 9 recommendations, ranging from a call to end gender-based discrimination and other forms of discrimination which exacerbate inequality in access to water and sanitation. It also calls for promoting women's equal leadership in water governance and management. Water projects that include women are more effective than those that do not. And so the evidence is there. We need to make sure that women are part of the decision-making process. And when they are, we see better outcomes. Among other recommendations is a call for more investments in gender data to inform water and climate policy. You've seen some of the examples of how important it is to visibilize the kinds of impact that women are projected to experience and are currently experiencing as a result of these crises. It's really important that we continue to collect this data, that we continue to make these data available at all levels to ensure that no one's being left behind in the formulation of policies to address these issues. In particular, collecting data on different groups and subgroups of women and girls who are furthest behind even as we speak. The codification of the rights of nature approach into law is one concrete way in which harmony with nature is being promoted and enforced at the national level. And we're seeing this across diverse contexts. I gave you the example of India and Bolivia, but of course we've seen similar legislation in Bangladesh, in Colombia, and in Uganda. It's important that we look at these issues and we look at these ways to codify these principles into law, but it's also important that we include the participation of women, of indigenous groups, of local leaders, and community members. This fundamentally will ensure that these kinds of approaches, these very distinct and potentially quite revolutionary approaches, live up to their full potential and bring about needed structural change in natural resource management. For women and their communities, the fight for social justice, including gender equality and environmental justice, go hand in hand. And that's one of the key kind of messages from our work. And it's really important that we see that and that we apply that framing in the work that's happening in terms of policy and programming. Too often these issues are kind of given lip service, but not truly addressed in an integrated way. More efforts are needed, not only to see these issues as interconnected, but to address them in an interconnected way. And this must also include all stakeholders. We need partnership, we need collaborations, and we need to do that with all stakeholders, including the private sector. And so I did want to take a moment to introduce the UN Women's Women Empowerment Principles, for those of you who may not be aware of them. They highlight the importance of gender-responsive leadership in businesses. There is an urgent need to increase women's representation in managerial positions, especially in utility companies. Private sector collaboration, particularly from water and energy utilities and others who are responsible for resource management, for natural resource management, are essential in driving gender equality and sustainability efforts. And so if you're in the audience, if you represent a private sector entity, especially if you're in the kind of water and energy utility industry, we encourage you to join the over 8,000 CEOs committed to the women's empowerment principles. Over 160 countries are represented, and it's really important to raise visibility on the need to change our business practices from within to promote gender equality and ecological rights, but to also make sure that we're seeing that in terms of their business practices as well. And the Women's Empowerment Principle is one example of how you can make these kind of commitments and work with others to implement them and to be held accountable for ensuring that these are committed and implemented across the board. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time. If you want to access our recent publications on gender, the SDGs, and the environment, I encourage you to do so. I'm going to put in front of you the QR code. So this will take you to some of those publications that I highlighted in the beginning of the presentation. But with that, I'll stop and thank you for your time.
Our thanks to Jeanette for her comments and to UN Women for this important body of work. We can't solve problems that we don't understand, and these reports highlight the crucial nature of data and evidence at the intersection of gender and climate change. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, UN Women. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Bernadette Tuazon, the Director of Photography for CNN Digital. She'll be sharing with us on gender and climate storytelling, human stories on gender and climate change. Bernadette, thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bernadette Tuazon, Director of Photography for CNN Digital. I'd like to thank UN Women for inviting us today. About a year ago, a gift landed on my lap about potentially doing a photo-led project that reports on underreported stories from underrepresented communities. If there were a theme or a storyline related to gender inequality that I can push for the best photography, what would it be? And if we were to do this, I was asked to think of bigger ways outside of the normal digital publishing process that would allow CNN Digital to successfully reach audiences offline and connect with public and policymakers. This conversation was essentially an editor's dream. There was excitement about being able to put a major project directly in front of decision makers by way of an exhibit and panel discussions. The goal that we set for ourselves is that by way of this project, we affect public opinion that could lead to meaningful change. Now, 12 months later, I am here in front of you as we unveil a photo-led project in collaboration with CNN Digital's As Equals and climate teams. My team worked hard in getting a working thesis that reports on the subject of gender inequality. We spent time researching topics and themes that centered on underrepresented voices. We ultimately found a UN report that states, gender inequality coupled with a climate crisis is one of the greatest challenges of the time. It poses threats to ways of life, livelihoods, health, safety, security for women and girls around the world. What does this mean? We found that climate change is impacting girls' education, gender, violence, child marriage, human trafficking, maternal health, migration, and food insecurity. These themes are the heart of this year-long project. We worked with 7 photographers from the Global South, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Guatemala, Brazil, Nigeria, and Kenya. And I wanted these themes to be covered by women photographers who are native to these regions, primarily because the core of our report centered on women and girls. Here is what these women photographers have documented. Lisa Marie David looked at human trafficking in the Philippines, which has been made worse by the climate crisis. In the aftermath of typhoons, many women and children have been forced into sex and labor work or felt that entering such work was their only option. Saina Bashir looked at the impact of extreme heat waves in maternal health in Pakistan, where many women work through their pregnancies and soon after giving birth. Pregnant women exposed to heat for prolonged periods of time have a higher risk of suffering complications. Fabiha Munir focused on how rising seas and flooding in Bangladesh contribute to child marriage. In the aftermath of natural disasters, financially struggling families often feel tempted to force their daughters into an early marriage. Victoria Razo explored climate migration in Guatemala, where agricultural communities are devastated by both drought and extreme rainfall. Men make up the majority of those who migrate, often leaving women with a double burden of looking after the home and their land. Adriana Zebrauskas explored the impact of deforestation and food security and the economic livelihoods of women in Brazil. For this chapter, her work captured something positive, and not everything was doom and gloom. She focused on a group of women who rely on the babasu palm tree to support their families, and the women-led movement to protect their rights and their environment. Taiwo Aino documented how climate change is putting girls' education at even greater risk in Nigeria. She highlighted the Center for Girls' Education in Zaria, which runs a series of programs to help girls and young women stay in school despite their challenges. Khadija Farah examined the link between extreme weather and gender-based violence in Kenya. Parts of the country are experiencing severe drought, which is exacerbating risks of domestic violence and sexual abuse. This project is being exhibited in the green zone of the Mobility Pavilion entrance, and we have an opening recession tonight, and all are welcome, inside the Food and Health building in the thematic arenas of the Blue Zone at 6:30 p.m. I hope to see you there. And then once again, to the young women, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Bernadette, for those striking images and powerful stories. It's now my pleasure to welcome a panel of speakers and to turn our discussion to policy experiences on water and Women Nexus. So I will welcome you, and please, as I say your name, please come and take the stage. First, Mr. Rene van Hel, the Director for Inclusive Green Growth and Ambassador for Sustainable Development of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. Thank you, Mr. Van Hel. Second, do we have Ms. Dalal Ilawa, the Secretary General Advisor for the Kingdom of Jordan? Okay. Thank you. I was told she might not be able to join us today. And I can welcome you, Alicia Douglas, the founder and CEO of the Water Rising Institute. And Kristen Invig, did I get that right? Invig, great. CEO and founder of the Women International Network and WIN Conference and president of the Global Citizen Forum. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Dr. Jessica Hernandez, a climate and land tenure specialist at Landesa, to give an Indigenous peoples perspective. And I see we will need one more chair for you, Jessica. Let's see. Would you mind bringing your chair to the stage? So sorry. Thanks, everyone. And finally, my pleasure to welcome Jessica Arians, the Senior Program Manager for Climate and Energy Policy at the National Wildlife Federation, and our youth representative today. Thank you so much. Thank you. So without further ado, I'll turn to our panelists. Mr. Rene van Hel, please get us started.
Well, that's quite an open question. Please get us started. Well, just perhaps a little bit about my mandate. I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I manage with a great team a big portfolio on water, energy, food, biodiversity, climate, and the red thread through that is gender. The budget is between 800 million to 1 billion per year. It fluctuates a little bit, but we have really solemnly said, and we're also now following up to that, that we will not approve any activity unless it has gender relevance. And actually, it was very easy to get everyone behind it, because it's either because of justice, but oftentimes it is about justice and efficiency and efficacy. So it really makes policies much better. So in that sense, it was very liberating for a couple of colleagues, and I must say that there is no gender difference in the enthusiasm for this policy. What I've now been doing is, because I manage a chunk of the Netherlands ODA program, is that I also try to convince my colleagues that basically, if you would think about two red threads between whatever we do, it should be gender and climate. And I've come quite a long way for that. So that's very positive. Last time I was in this wonderful forum was during the UN Water Conference, and that is also what we're really seeking for. We want partnerships, we want to be equal. I also think that we need to be self-critical, because if we see at the end of the day what we achieve and who in the end we reach, it's very disappointing how few women are reached by our activities. So that really needs to change, and we really have to pick up our pace. And that's something Evita is here also in the room that we also discussed when we were walking here. That we felt this is not good enough. So that's where we're coming from, the Netherlands. We are your partner, and we also realize that it's not good enough. So tell us how we can improve our stance, and just rest assured that we are pulling with you and trying to achieve the same thing. So that just as a kickoff, and there's many more people who are probably have to say important things. So I cut myself off.
You still have 5 minutes. You're good.
Okay, good.
We have the whole time for you to offer your remarks, but I can come back to you. That's not a problem. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Let's do that. All right, I will turn it over to you, Alicia and Kristen, who are jointly here together with the Global Citizen Forum and Women International Network to open it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Alicia Douglas, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Water Rising Institute. We were fortunate to be able to be involved with UN Women on the report that Jeanette so graciously talked about today, and the recommendations for the need, not just for women, but finance for women. And I will be speaking more on that, but I also want to just state that when we commission organizations such as UN Women to produce a report that shows about gender equality, we should not just be giving them the finance just to do the research and the statisticians on the report. We need for agencies to be funding the report to go much further. Unfortunately, the report that you have seen today that Jeanette spoke about was only funded in that way. It did not provide us funding to be able to give this report legs. So if we're really going to start walking our talk, or talking the walk, whatever that's going to be, gender equality must be part of the financing and not just on the reporting. So women need to be able to have access to capital. And so as a woman founder and as a CEO, these are things that we struggle with. And only 0.3%, and please listen to that, only 0.3% is going to women entrepreneurs that are working in environmentally and in water. These are challenges that we are being faced with globally. So if we're going to turn this tide, I believe that women are literally the drop of water in and in the ocean. And when we all come together, we're able to make waves. So we're going to be talking more about the data on what we're doing at the Institute, how we're bringing things together. My dear friend and colleague here, she's incredible on the work that she does. So I'll let her share just a little bit, and then we'll continue to keep things flowing really well.
Thank you all, and also want to congratulate all of us for taking the time to be here today and to listen to this important topic and be part of it. And I think all of us that work with women are actually working a lot, and it's a lot of work. And so that's also an acknowledgement to all of us in this room right now. So I'm thinking a lot about this. How can we, each and every one of us, awaken to really connect with each other, and particularly with other women. So we see this thing with financing that Alicia is mentioning. So it's hard to get a long-term funding. It's hard, and we need to think long-term, because that's what will save ourselves on this planet. So, and that's something I think is also inherent to women. We are typically those that are the bearer of culture and inheritance of values. And those values we need to bring forward, and we need to think long term. And we're living in a world where it's often speeding up to very short term thinking. So how can we combine all of that? And I think coming together in small groups and work together and really support each other to care and share is some of the ways for that. So just, yeah, thank you.
So Bandel Padichi Biguri, my name is Dr. Jessica Hernandez, and I'm from the Maya Chortim Binisa Nations. So today I will kind of be highlighting the indigenous perspectives. And I think it's important for us to truly integrate indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing is to look at water through a holistic lens. And that also means that we're not just making water a silo or a lone entity, but also integrating land and all of our relations that we have with our plant and animals, relatives, and our non-living relatives as well, such as, you know, land and mountains and rocks. And I think that when we talk about indigenous knowledges, we also have to talk about the spirituality that goes into our ways of being, because oftentimes it's not just a knowledge system, it's also a way of life. And how do we uplift that? For Landesa, especially in the work that we're doing in Liberia, we're actually harnessing in local knowledge to actually integrate in forest conservation and land use planning. And as we all know, Liberia is a coastal community where 58% of the communities in Liberia actually live in coastal regions. So of course, when we're talking about land use planning and forest conservation, we're also integrating water as well. And I think that when we talk about indigenous women, especially in the water issues, we know that we're facing a lot of harm and violence. In the United States, we can point to what happened at Standing Rock, where it was indigenous women leading that Water is Life movement to kind of stop the pipelines. But we saw how women in that community were facing a lot of harm, police brutality, and so forth. So I think that my call for action is that we need to integrate indigenous ways of knowing and integrating that holistic nature that we have as indigenous peoples, where water is not necessarily just a thing that we can put in a box, but actually look at everything through that holistic nature where land, our air, and everything is interconnected. So Padiuchi, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here. Sorry if I'm pulling the cord too much. So my name is Jessica Arians. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation, which is a US-based conservation nonprofit that works on, mostly on wildlife conservation. And I work on climate and energy policy, and picking up on these themes of thinking holistically, thinking intersectionality. I want to bring in the climate equity lens into this conversation. As we heard from the report, you can't not talk about the water crisis without bringing in climate change. You can't not talk about climate change and the water crisis without talking about feminism, women and girls, and gender equality. NWF is a proud partner, one of the founding partners, and the sort of backbone organization of the Climate Equity Collaborative, which is only about 2 years old, so still pretty new, but it's a public-private partnership that's meant to bring in some non-traditional partners into the climate advocacy space, and also really focused on bringing youth leaders into this space and providing them opportunities to gain resources, build their capacity, and to scale what youth know works. I think as we see here at COP28 and probably in all of our spheres, and certainly in the US, it's really youth who are helping drive and push leaders on climate action and really demanding it and thinking about climate equity as one of the top issues they care about. So happy to kind of dive into the Q&A, but really want to, so grateful to be here, especially with so many amazing women on the panel and in the audience, but really thinking about if we're really going to tackle the water crisis and think about protecting water ecosystems worldwide, without that climate equity lens, we're not going to solve that problem, right? So it's really, really crucial, I think, to the conversation, both in how we're talking about it, who's at the table, and what kind of policies and investments we're pushing forward.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Thanks all for those wonderful opening remarks. So we'll come back around and give you all a chance to expand. Can you just tell us a little bit about what strategies, what policies, what improvements in data would you recommend to increase the gender responsiveness of our global response to the water crisis? So I'll give it back to you, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I have a terrible last name, but René is the first name. That's easy. That's easier.
We'll go with that.
Of course, as the Dutch government, we were also responsible when we formulated the SDGs. And of course, what is quite striking, that is out of the 11 SDGs, 6 indicators, none of them are gender specific. So making the goal rather gender blind. So that is something that we definitely should not repeat. And that goes on for quite a lot of the policies that we have formulated. So that is sort of a correction that we are applying to our own stuff. What we also see is that a lot of our policies are focused on households instead of individual level. And what I get back from many organizations is that if you focus on the households, you basically focus on the guys and not on the women, which is not always such a great idea if you want to achieve something. What is also lacking is investment in data, disaggregated by sex and other socioeconomic characteristics, and that is really essential. And of course, the financing was already mentioned. It is this awkward 0.03, so that's really a big issue. And of course, for example, we are on the GEF, the GCF, the LDCF, and the CIFs. And with a couple of like-minded, we're definitely trying to push for gender, but also I would say to my co-panelist, please push us, because we need your insight, we need your creativity to do better. At the UN Water Conference, we really tried to communicate that we felt that gender was important. And as co-host, we were, of course, super happy that there were 800 commitments to the so-called Water Action Agenda. But how many of those 800 commitments had gender in their focus or in their description? Well, just 37. So you could also say that as co-host, we could have done better there. But also, let's say, also as a community here, when there is the opportunity, let's really push for it. Because, and that's what I would like to say and wrap up, there's really nowadays perhaps more in countries like mine than in some of yours, but this idiotic push against gender, as if it's something weird, as if it's something woke, as if it's something political. But it's basically only about human rights, and just the very fact that people try to degrade the term gender is already an insult to any serious human rights policy. So that is also something that we're up to. There's a lot of hybrid bullshit going on about gender, and that should unite us in countering all that fake news that is also spread about this issue. Thank you.
Love that. Is this working? You really, thank you. Thank you for stating the elephant in the room, as I would always like to say. And I think that the key thing, what women do bring when they come to water, is they bring the balance. And when we really look at, we don't want all women just managing water. We want a balance of both men and women. But right now, those stats, and I'm going to give this to you, is 1.2 billion either work directly or indirectly in water. So I want to say that again. 1.2 billion work directly or indirectly in water. Out of that, only 15% make up of women. Okay, so right there, we can really get down to exactly the challenges that we're having. So our solution with what we are making the recommendations going back on the report that was reported today is not just better understanding data and understanding gender equality indicators, but how can women serve for the call to action for workforce development? Because we all know workforce development creates jobs and it increases economies. So this is a great opportunity for the finance committees to look at the fact that we need to be funding women. We need to be funding women programs, trainings for women to put women in jobs. Keyword jobs, okay? Not just advocacy, but jobs, because jobs produce economic results. So as women, we have the ability to do that. We have the ability to bring abundance to the water sector as women. We focus on public health because public health is something that is directly related to us personally. Where men may focus on finance, which is good, because we need the balance of both. So understanding with what we are doing, we together bring an even balance to that. And we flow collectively together when we come at it together. So together, let's change that 15% and let's bring that up. Yeah.
Thank you. Here's bringing that up. And I was reflecting also, if Mother Earth, she is expressing herself as us, as the mountains, the trees, the rivers, the humans, and everybody. So then we are all part of the same thing, and we are interconnected, and so on. And just when you said that the gender discussion is now almost getting a little bit of a regression, I felt, oh my God, I felt tears in my eyes. And I was realizing that all these years of connecting women in particular is just, it takes so long time, and sometimes there is a regression. But what I feel is so important is that we feel it, that we really, really feel it. I mean, one, take in the numbers, one, take in what both of you have said, and that we feel it, and then we love Earth, and we love the rivers, because what we love, we take even more action for. That's what really moves the mountain. So I was just thinking about that right now, right here. That's important, and that we work together and care and share. So just on that.
Thank you. I'm going to read one of the sentences that's actually listed in the report, and it starts, for example, much of the water stress and security experiences by the Navajo Diné Nation in the United States derives from the use of settler law to curtail indigenous tribal sovereignty and water rights and the diversion resources to urban centers as opposed to rural locations. And I bring that to reading it out loud. It's because in Landesa, we actually work with indigenous and rural women. And when we talk about land rights, there's a key missing component, which is sovereignty, right? The sovereignty of indigenous and rural communities to actually manage their natural resources and their land. And I think that oftentimes we tend to ignore that, especially when we're talking about water insecurity, where the land rights and the 10-year discourse is actually removed from that. And at Landesa, we're working with a lot of coastal communities, especially in one of the projects that we have, where we're working with mangroves to protect mangrove ecosystems. And one of the things that we're learning is how to, commodify that international laws for land to also integrate the coastal lands and the laws that are also embedded in coastal communities. And I think, just to highlight something that, we all said is that one of my grandmother's teaching was that when all men learn how to respect all women, they will learn how to respect the most powerful of them all, which is Mother Earth. And I want to end that with that. Thank you.
It's a hard sentence to follow, but I'll try my best. I agree with everything the other panelists have said. I think I just want to pick up on two threads to your question about kind of data and information. One, something Renee mentioned about getting more granularity in the data and disaggregating by sex and gender. I think that's really important, and also something I think about in my role working on climate in the US is like getting more data from rural populations instead of just urban centers. I think about this in flooding in the US, which is an increasing risk certainly in places I work with and many places around the globe, as the report highlighted. But we need more granularity in our data to understand the risks. And then something Alicia said about the workforce development that really resonated with me, and is something the Climate Equity Collaborative and the National Wildlife Federation works to, think about as we're building this new water economy. We talk about the green economy or the clean economy a lot in the US as we're thinking about kind of implementing climate solutions, making sure that who can access that economy and benefit from it, both the kind of like financial benefits and the jobs themselves. And if we're not thinking about women as we're thinking about those training opportunities, those connections with maybe organized labor, with like from secondary education, post-secondary education, even primary education, I think we have to think about women and that climate equity lens I mentioned earlier, kind of as we're thinking about that workforce development from the earliest days all the way through maybe career changes. So just wanted to pick up on those 2 points because I think they're really, really central.
Oh, of course. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I would also like to add that we need data to go a little bit deeper on gender behavioral norms. We are lacking this data of asking questions of why women are not supported either in leadership roles or within policy. So when we have this data, and I'm competing with a helicopter now, literally, when we have this data, we can go a little bit deeper on what we need to be doing to change our behaviors toward women and colleagues, but asking those really hard questions. So if somebody came back and said, no, I don't support a woman in a leadership position, and nor do I support a woman in a policy place. It's the UNDP came out with a report on the gender norms within behavioral aspects, and it was alarming to really see this data and what work that we need to be doing to go further on to that. So if there was a problem, can we get that data, right? And how do we start working to change that? And we need to go deeper of understanding why men, and same thing with women. Women said that they don't think that other women should be in leadership roles or within policy. And we've seen it recently within parliaments, within the New Zealand Prime Minister, and we've seen it within the Prime Minister from Finland. And what we also feel is that there needs to be a tribe. The tribe is important, and I'm going to talk about, and Kristen and I have been really discussing this in depth, of why we need to be creating a tribal approach in communities. We did this work when I was in Detroit as well as in Flint on tribal. And it is global from tribal. It is not just based in certain areas of indigenous people, but these were things that we did before colonization. We need to get back to the tribal. Women were leaders in tribal. We need this. The planet needs us to be coming together as women more than ever and giving us the opportunity to build tribes amongst us.
Okay, yeah. Over the past 26 years, I've been spending my life connecting women. And one of the things that I saw also on some of our meetings, doing evaluation forums in the old days of who's the best speaker, whatever, I realized that out of 97% women in the room, they always rated the men as the best speaker. So then I started to understand this work is not only about women, it's really about a way of thinking. Perhaps we can call it the patriarchy. So how do we actually dismantle and dissolve that in our thinking? And that way of thinking resides in both women and in men. So this process of awakening us all up, including me, including all of us here, to that and our own thought patterns is very important. Now, connecting to the tribe will be also to come together in groups, or where we are looking first and foremost also, where's my biases here? How can I stay radically open, loving the sister next to me and myself too, because we have a lot of self-judgment. So the work now in this moment is an inner work and an outer work, because we need to work on our biases and overcome it. And the work is not only that of men, it's also that of women. But of course, many women are awakened already, but it is still something to work on.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think at Standing Rock, right, most of the indigenous women were actually the leaders. And I think that going back to those points, a lot of the indigenous women are actually leading many environmental and climate justice movements. But yet when we talk about media and when we talk about who's highlighted or whose voice is actually uplifted, is usually the men. And I think that, the report talks about women have played an essential role in the global movement to transform indigenous values and local ecological knowledge into enforceable ecological rights. And I think that one of the things that I always highlight is my own community in Oaxaca, Mexico, because we're one of the only remaining matriarchal societies where women are our leaders, where women are the ones who have the final say. And oftentimes when we talk about colonization, unfortunately, it has been removed from many indigenous communities where patriarchy is so embedded. And I think that for us, in order for us to actually achieve gender justice, we have to unlearn and relearn the ways that we have been taught, because, patriarchy is deeply embedded in, since our pre-K, since we start education from our homes to our schools. And I think that that's very important. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think picking up off one thing Dr. Hernandez said, I think for me highlights that we know the solutions to the problems we're talking about here, right? Like we know we can follow the lead of our indigenous leaders who have been sustainably managing water resources since time immemorial, and we can follow local communities, oftentimes led by women, right? Like we know the solutions to the problems. It's just a question of scaling and listening and financing. So that is, I think, a little piece of optimism I try and hold while working in the climate space, because it can be quite depressing otherwise. And to your point, Alicia, on the Climate Equity Collaborative, yeah, one of it's really focused on, I think, trying to build youth leaders and bring youth leaders into the climate movement, and thinking about how do we, as I said, resource them, how do we build a youth network. And one of the, I think, neat things the Climate Equity Collaborative is doing is we have a youth advisory council. This is not a new idea. Many nonprofits and civil society organizations have these councils. What the Climate Equity Collaborative has done is, I think, tried to integrate it from the very beginning into the bylaws. So like as the bylaws of this collaborative are being created, we have the Youth Advisory Council, and we're taking guidance from youth on saying like what those bylaws should be. We're also compensating youth for participating, which is really, really key, right? If we want people to show up and share their time and their expertise, we should compensate them for that time and expertise. Oftentimes that doesn't happen, especially if you're relying on what we might call environmental justice communities or marginalized communities and trying to work with them and get their resources. So building that Youth Advisory Council and kind of integrating it into the design of the collaborative from the very beginning is one, I think, concrete way we're trying to really bring the voices of youth in from the beginning. And just like we want women at the table making decisions, I think we need youth at the table making decisions as well, because they're the ones going to be left are left with a lot of the messes of the past. And so they need to be at the decision-making table as well. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think, but building that network doesn't involve just like sort of letting people run free. I think we want to provide learning and capacity building resources so we can train youth, connect youth from different communities, and make sure they are able to kind of help tackle this climate crisis.
Thanks so much. So I want to bring it back to Renee, because we heard such amazing comments from all of you, and don't want to sideline our one male gender equality champion on the panel here. So Renee, I'll have you kick it off with just a little bit. Any thoughts to respond before we go to our next question?
I feel very modest, but at least I know that I have a great group of colleagues behind me in The Hague. No, but not only in The Hague, because one of the things that we're really also trying to do is to enlarge and to strengthen the power of voices. So we work a lot with all kinds of NGOs and stakeholders. And for example, yesterday I was in a forum that was organized by Gaga. And what was also super inspiring is that the first one who took the floor was somebody from indigenous people, because it was about climate, and then also about the question, who reads nature? And of course, it's pretty clear who is pretty good at reading nature, as you said, and also not having siloed approaches is what I hear you saying. And the only thing I can say is there's a nasty backlash. There's really a nasty backlash. So we have to be very sort of sound and remain rational, and also engage with let's say with others who also suffer from this backlash in the conversations that we see. And just a compliment to UN Water. I mean, we really think that from commodity to common good is kind of a benchmark. And I think as long as we're able to sort of feed into best practices, and what works and what does not work, but at the same time keep a local focus, we can make progress. Because at the end of the day, it's about half the population, or perhaps even in a lot of countries a little bit more, because somehow biologically guys are feeble. So there's all, but I don't know what it is. But seriously speaking, it's about half of the population. So come on, let's get our act together. Thank you.
Maybe we can call it patriarchy, I heard Kristen say, which I thought was great. Yeah. All right, well, we have just a few minutes left before we open it up to the audience for your questions and your comments. So just brief reflections from each of you would be great. How would you recommend that we ensure that climate action actively involves and empowers women and marginalized genders in decision-making processes at all levels? Why don't we start with Jessica, and we'll work our way back.
Well, I think I don't necessarily want to repeat myself, but I will. I think thinking about who's at the table when the decisions are being made, and making sure that women, and including those from marginalized groups, are there, making, not only saying this is my experience, we don't have the data, but they're there, helping make the decisions, and investing in women entrepreneurs, women-led community organizations, Indigenous women who are leading these movements to fight for water rights, water affordability, making sure they have the capacity to make decisions, they're respected, they're listened to, and they're supported financially.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, this is a saying, an Indigenous saying, the right to water is the right to life. I'm the river and the river is me. And I think that oftentimes we forget that we're a part of nature and nature is a part of us. And we have to work in reciprocal relationships where we're not just benefiting from nature, but also responding and taking care of nature. And I think that for us to do that, we have to put at the front and center Indigenous women and local women, because they are the cultural bearers, they're the cultural knowledge holders of many communities. And in order for us to truly heal our planet and also to address climate change, we have to put Indigenous women at the front and center.
Yeah, I would recommend also that education, and that education is this interconnected way of that we understand how we are all part of a web of life and everything is connected, as you say, but also that we really work on ourselves, that we take in both the analytical, all the numbers, but that we also are giving value to our own intuition and our own senses. I know so many people who know things are wrong, but they don't take the stand. So we need to also help each other, making the tough decisions and support that. There is nothing shameful in standing up for water for other women or for that has been abused, and that also has to be dissolved, healed, and put out in the room, and then we go on. There is so much power. I was standing next to a waterfall in my own country, Norway, this summer, and there was so much power. And I thought, if I am water, just like that, I have power. We have power. So yes.
So I think, in my opinion, we as a society don't value water unless it becomes scarce. I also feel that we are in a place with where women are not placed a value. I believe that we can give water her voice, but it's women giving water her voice. But through that, we need finance, we need support, because water is managed locally. Water is not managed at a national or at a country or at a world level. It's managed locally. By nature, water is very conservative, and there is an incredible amount of bureaucracy that comes along with water. And it's very complicated. And while water may connect, we have these challenges on being able to connect it. And my dear friend, Hank Ovik, said one thing to me, and water is the natural connector. And I do believe that water has the ability to heal, not just us, but give us all our purpose in that, because we understand what that purpose is. And I think the call of action needs to be that water needs value. Water needs to be funded. And one of the things that came out of UN Water was there was very little funding commitments. There was calls to action on with what people were doing, but funding was not placed at that table. And again, and nor were women. So we have two commonalities in moving forward to that call to action.
Well, indeed, because I agree with everything you're saying, because if you look at water, we take it for granted. And we also take for granted that the ones who are managing it are most of the time women. And then on top of that, we don't empower those who are managing it to truly manage it. We take it away. We don't give them the women oftentimes the right of having a property. So there's a lot wrong with how we deal with water, and that needs to change. And as much as Henk is your friend, he's also my friend, and he's on my team. So no, this is definitely, I think, one of the insights that will help us. Because I was at the World Bank meeting, the annual meeting, World Bank, and there is sort of a trinity now. The trinity is there's no development without fighting against climate change and preserving biodiversity. And it's this trinity has a common denominator, and that is what water plays, the role that water plays in all these different sectors, and in preserving biodiversity, and in preserving also being able to deal with climate. And as I already said, if I get my way, then the two sort of red threads within our ODA policy will be gender and climate. But always in the back of my mind that there is basically this trinity between development, biodiversity, and climate, and that is sort of the way forward in dealing with who we are. But because indeed, it's so funny, but a lot of people don't understand that we're part of nature, and that is so dumb. Because if we don't start realizing that, we're definitely screwed. So also thank you for that insight.
Dewal is not here.
Sure. Sounds good. Then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes. So the deputy secretary, she's the deputy assistant to the Secretary General of the Water Ministry for Jordan. Jordan, as a country, has a gender equality policy through the entire country. Gender equality is recognized in Jordan. But what we are finding is that it is not being developed, and they're working diligently on to getting it into the water sector. And if she was here right now, she is my sister and very dear friend, she would say that we need to be able to better understand on how we come together on this, but how we balance one another on these decision makings. Because while she is the diamond, as I like to say, you know, in the rough, she's between two crashing waves of men. And sometimes her ideas and her thoughts for how we move innovation forward are criticized because she is a woman. And I've seen this in other areas of the world as well. And these are one of the things that we really want to be able to change. We must start coming together and not criticizing each other when we are in places. We have to be doing better on that, because water cannot wait. It just cannot.
Need gender justice. Yeah. I think that's a good place to turn to the audience and open it up for your comments or your questions to any of our panelists. Yeah, please go ahead.
You said you would like to be pushed, so I would like to push. Thank you.
So I'm telling your word, and I would like to push about gender climate fund and UN women relationship. We are trying to work together, but we are not counterpart of the Green Fund. And it is a little difficult if Green Funds, all of them, try to work with gender issues, try to work with women, and they don't have UN Women like a partner. And UN Women knows how to work with them. We have a know-how, and we really want to push to include UN Women as a partner, to do it well and to do it seriously.
In the Green Climate Fund. In the Green Climate Fund.
Yes, in the Green Climate Fund, and all of them, because not only Green Fund, we are not a partner of any of them. So we really need to work together to do it, because other agencies are so nice, so good, they work very well, but they don't have teams, complete holistic teams to work on it. We are the holistic team to work on it. So please count on us.
Thanks, Nydia.
No, that's a very clear recommendation, and the new CEO of the Green Climate Fund is a leading voice and a lady. So I'll take up that conversation with her. Thank you.
Great. I see Esther.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That was amazing and inspiring. Water, I mean, for us to have and continue having adequate and clean water all over the world, we must have to protect our biodiversity. To be able to do that, we must ensure that we have security of land tenure, because nobody is going to conserve anything if they know they don't have any secure land tenure. Now, we also do know that financing, because today is about financing for land governance, equitable and just land governance is so political. I wonder how many countries in the world will be upfront requesting money to improve gender just land governance. Not at least in the continent that I have been working, Latin America, Asia, Africa. They're not interested because it's about power. I have a question for you. How do we ensure we have enough resources getting to securing and advancing land governance and securing more important women's land rights? I work for the Stand for Her Land campaign. We thought this was an entry point for achieving gender equality. I tell you, the amount of barriers we are getting to raise resources because people are afraid to give us money to organize for securing land rights. People want project, but they don't want to organize movement. We are about organizing a movement that will secure women's land rights. I want to hear your thoughts. How do we ensure we can receive adequate resources to secure a movement all over the world to secure women's land rights?
So we are proposing a project right now that is actually in India, and to work with women farmers on their land rights. So one of the things that what we have heard from UN Women is that the land rights are given to the woman upon her father or her mother, from her husband passing away. But what happens is that she signs those land rights off to her brother. Okay, so it is also education on that, but empowering her because she feels in a place that she cannot manage this by herself. And I can only speak from the data that we collected in Zanzibar. I cannot speak of any other place in Africa except for that. But it was the same thing that we continued to see over and over again, whereas that the women did not feel that they had earned that right to that land. And it was an education aspect. What I'm seeing, we need to educate more on the ground at a local level is with what we continue to propose, to your point.
Also, can I add also, I think this is a mega huge problem. And you also said they don't want us to. Of course they don't want us to, because in a way they take that's your power. So I think that's something I remember many times in my own life, and I've seen it with other women. They don't want us to do it. And that we then are quick in catching that and mobilize with others. We must take a stand for this, because having land rights is power. And it's so vital, so that now coming together in groups with the men that get it and the women who get it, and work on legislation, because the inheritance things that you mentioned, I know in many African countries is like that still also. And it's just not acceptable. So
she also needs to be able to get a fair wage at market, and we've also seen that as a problem too. So when she's going to market with her either spices or whatever she is farming, she's not getting a fair wage for that. That is another problem.
yeah, so work on, sorry.
I see Jessica had her hand up for this.
I just want to add one more thing, picking up on the being afraid to fund a movement and organizing. I don't work on land tenure issues, but on climate, we see that in the U.S. with philanthropic, foundations, which I work for a nonprofit organization. There's many other nonprofit organizations from the U.S. and around the world here. And I think one of the things that my organization and others have to do a better job of is pushing philanthropy to say, no, what you need to be doing is actually funding these movements and these organizing, because without that, we're not going to build that local power to push for the change we need. I think about that in climate, but that connects to land tenure, to gender equality, to water rights, right? So I think we all need to do a better job pushing anyone who's funding. I think about it in the philanthropic space, but it could be government, it could be others, could be the private sector, to say organizing for these movements is actually really, really crucial. It takes a long, long time. It's maybe not as sexy as, and it's not a discrete project, but it is so, so crucial to get to the change we actually need to see. So I don't have a beautifully thoughtful answer to your question, but that's something I think about too in my role. So thank you for raising that.
No, it's also definitely part of our programs for Power of Voices. But for example, also for something a little bit more seemingly technocratic as IFAD. IFAD is the Farmers Bank of the UN. And one of the things that we always bring across is sort of having this conversation with them, how gender sensitive are their policies and how much ingrained and granular is also their approach towards these land rights. So yeah, thank you for your wisdom, and also rest assured that we are on your side.
We have a panelist on the stage from a land tenure rights organization. Dr. Hernandez, would you like to add anything?
I think that when we look at sometimes, there are these colonial structures that prevent us from actually granting rights to indigenous or local people, especially women. One of the things that I'm seeing, especially in Latin America, is that indigenous peoples are fighting for rights to nature. So for instance, in Ecuador, there was a new constitution, became the first country to grant nature the right to exist and to maintain and regenerate its life cycle, structure, functions, and evolutionary processes. In 2017, New Zealand's Mount Taranaki, a sacred place to the Maori people, became the country's third geographic feature to be granted legal personhood with the same rights, duties, and liabilities as a legal person. And I think that oftentimes as indigenous peoples, we're seeing these movements where we're removing ourselves from trying to advocate for rights for ourselves, but advocating rights for nature. And I'm seeing that paradigm shifts because many countries, as you were mentioning, they want to keep the power, and it's kind of hard to address the power dynamics with nature because you cannot necessarily fight with nature, but you can fight with, indigenous peoples and local communities.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, I see one back here.
Hello, I'm Trupti Jain. I'm coming from India, from the Gujarat, the western part of India. I agree with all the kind of the problems you have put, and then there are some more problems also related to the women farmers, but we are not talking about the problems. I just want to say one comment and one question. One comment is that we have the climate adaptive technology Bhungru, through which we have helped the nearly 125,000 farmers, rural women farmers, to empower a lot. We involve them right from the beginning, and right now not only the identification of the location to the maintenance of the technology is done by the illiterate women farmers. I mean, those who, apart from the educations, those who believe that they cannot do anything, although they have the lots of traditional knowledge, they have been grown up like this way. So if we believe in that women and we trust on the women, even in the technology aspects, we can make the wonders. So that's just, I just want to say that have a faith and let's develop the faith among them. It will work wonder. And second thing is that I'm just curious because when the finance, today is a finance day and the financing discussions are there, and somebody saying the adaptation fund is shrinking and mitigation fund is much more large. I'm not talking about the data, but why is happening? And I mean, it's because the adaptation is done, mostly technology is done by the women. It happens at the local level and it is cheaper also compared to the big. So how we can increase the utilizations or allocations, whatever the difficulties there in terms of the adaptation fund. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask panelists to keep your responses brief for this. We're running out of time. We're going to welcome our closing speaker here soon.
Well,
so
I think that you said something that's key, and that is we need to value water. for what it is. It's a relatively scarce resource. That's also where I'm glad that we were able to initiate the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, on which, by the way, there's a lot of women, not only the DG WTO, but also, for example, Mariana Mazzucato and a lot of other women. And I think if they bring out I think proof of their report will also be how they can actually challenge us in doing better in hooking up finance for climate adaptation. Because I think we're failing in large parts because we don't value water for what it is. We don't value it as a government, we don't value it hence in the private sector, hence we don't really develop projects that address climate adaptation. So thank you for your insights, and also you're referring to an area in India that has also that's also affected by changes in the hydrological cycle. So there you are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for just bringing that aspect of adaptation, not just the financing, but the mitigation of that financing and what really needs to happen. But we're also dealing with policy. And so there has to be also a shift in policy, but we also need the private sector to be stepping forward because the public sector just does not have the funding. It's either that or they go to us as society and to really figure out a way that we're going to be able to increase the rate of how water is managed. And if water is still going to be which it is, a human right and access to that right, then we need to be able to support funding in ways that isn't currently being managed. So that is the other problem, back to what I had said earlier, that water is conservative by nature. People don't want to fully pay for it, but somebody has to manage it, and somebody has to replace the infrastructure or put in infrastructure. So who pays for that? Those are the questions that I continue to push back. So it has to be a balance of all four sectors, including us as civil society.
That's so interesting. There are all these sort of ethical dilemmas, private sector, public sector, who is funding it. It's a common good, it's a human right. There are many, many things to think about here. But in the smaller projects, I think also we have to remember the water is flowing and that we are also supporting each other. Each of us, even small projects can be supported by us. I can support her, she support her, and so on and so forth. And that we keep that very much alive. You see over centuries, women, at least this past century, women have had less in many cultures to do with managing the finances. It's been done by the men. So we need to also claim that back and say, no, I'm responsible for that, And that the small things support women. Women support women, even the small, and make it always flow, receiving and giving always. I think we support that, yeah.
I think one of the recommendations I have is to harness indigenous knowledge, especially when integrating in climate change adaptation, because oftentimes when we talk about climate change adaptation, we forget that many indigenous peoples have had to adapt to climate change already. And I think that oftentimes it's indigenous women who are leading those climate change adaptation movements and strategies in their own communities. But yet when we look at the policy, whether it be land tenure or water rights, women are not necessarily included in the climate change policy. And yet alone is indigenous knowledge, and I think it's starting local and then thinking globally will be the best solution for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add on that I think you raise an incredibly important point just about the need to continually elevate adaptation, which sometimes takes a backseat to mitigation in the finance and the policy and many different aspects, right? And we know communities around the world, indigenous women are adapting. They've had to adapt, right? So it's happening around the world. And one of the things, so I think continuing to elevate it in the work that we're doing, in the storytelling that we're doing. I mean, the CNN example is maybe a great example of kind of like sharing those stories. And I think one of the messages that can work is that adaptation is incredibly cost effective, and that maybe can help sell it to the folks in the private sector. I think there's like a stat on the wall over there about every $1 invested in land reclamation can save $7. So this is a very, very cost effective investment. I think driving home that piece that if we don't invest now, we're going to really, really pay for it later. And many communities are, in fact, are already paying for it. And oftentimes those are women and marginalized groups. So elevating that message will remain important because we can't, we can't just do mitigation. We have to do both. We're at that stage in the climate crisis where both are desperately needed.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will thank our panelists for this rich discussion. Thank you so much, all of you. All right. Oh, yes, let's get a picture. Oh. All right, and with that, it's my pleasure to welcome our final speaker of the day to offer closing remarks. So as we have her come up to the stage, I'll offer an introduction. Please welcome Louise Baker, who's the director of the Global Mechanism for the UNCCD Secretariat. We're still having a photo session, so I'll trade you out.
Perfect. Thanks. Can I take one of these and sit down?
Absolutely.
But we both sit down.
Sure.
Hello. That was a fantastic session, wasn't it? Really, really enlightening. I have a favorite quote about women in water. I hope it doesn't offend anybody because I find it really funny. It's actually from Eleanor Roosevelt. There you go. Well, she says, well, it starts out quite rude. It starts out and goes, a woman's like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her in hot water. And it's such a good quote. I love that. I use it quite often. And I think that's really true. The hot water situation is it's not just an analogy for anything anymore. We've got a lot of challenges and a lot of problems. We're in a lot of hot water, and women are absolutely critical to getting us out of that. At the Global Mechanism, we are fully committed to making sure that gender is integrated in everything that we do in the terms of the project pipeline. We are working, actually, it's quite fun. We've actually got a fantastic project, and she's at the back in a pink jacket, so I don't know if she's listening or not. Catherine, wave your hand. Catherine, fabulous Catherine in my team, has managed to secure a really exciting project from the African Development Bank on drought and women's leadership and access to finance. So I think it touched on many of the issues that you're talking about, really building up that leadership of women and young people who can advocate for better management of water in their space. That is in Madagascar, go on, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Very good. So if anybody's here from Madagascar, Mozambique or Zimbabwe, very good. You need to find Catherine. If you're a young female leader, we need to know you and see what we can do to help. But it has to be something that is, it can't just be talking, right? So we're really, from UNCCD side now, we have a gender action plan. We've got equality in the Secretariat. We've got the policies in place. And now from our side, really focusing on these projects and these programs making a difference on the ground and ensuring that women are there. They're not just in terms of benefiting from it, but from designing it to making it work for their communities, for them. I did also want to touch on the land rights piece, which is another part of our kind of agenda that's increasingly gaining traction. I'm a convert to the gender issue. Right, okay. I shouldn't be a convert, but I am. For us, our focus is on land degradation neutrality, conservation, sustainable management, restoration of land, big global programs. actually, women don't control any of the land anyway. So, you know, do we need to talk to them? We do, and we need to we need to consistently talk to them because they're doing the work on the land, but don't own it. I'm trying to do the finance piece. You sit there and people are doing fabulous things that they can't scale up because they can't borrow money, because they haven't got any collateral, because they don't own the land. The same is true with the water issue. This management of this water rights and ensuring that the people who do the work, the people who work the land, who manage the water, have got the rights to be able to control it and build their resource and steward their resource has got to be at the heart of what we do. It's going to be increasingly like that as pressure on climate means resources gets more restricted. Good land stewardship, good water stewardship is going to be critical to our survival, and those people who are doing the management need to have the control. From a sort of technical perspective, there was one thing I want to put out there just as a question. We're working on some quite interesting work mostly in the water shortage area, so in the drought perspective. There's quite a lot of things like drought insurance out there. But what tends to happen with drought insurance is it's barometric. It pays if it doesn't rain. The kind of question that we're working on at the moment, and I'd love your feedback and how we make this gender responsive, really, is that what we're looking to do is develop some insurance that rewards or pays out to the people who have done the work that helps them adapt. So it's not a kind of collective payment even to a community, to a council or a government or even a co-op, but to an individual who is taking on the ability to manage their resources properly. And then when there's a climate disaster, when there's a drought, or it could work for flood as well, that they would then benefit from having taken all the adaptive steps. We're still working on that, and it's still a challenge for me. So whilst I have the experts on gender in the room, I'll put it out there. I need to make that gender responsive. Land and natural resources, we all need them. We've all got to make them work. And is it half of the yellow sky? What's the It's a fabulous book about Nigeria where, anyway, it doesn't matter. Women are holding up half of the sky. We'll use that phrase, and unless women are part of the solution, that is going to fall down on our heads. So women are like tea bags. Put them in hot water. They will find the solution. They are strong in hot water. They are going to change the world, but you've got to give them the tools to do it. And we are trying. We're a very small cog in this wheel, though, and it does need to be elevated. We're starting with these 3 countries. Please find Catherine if you're from those 3 countries. We hope that we can take that to scale going forward. I got some fascinating inputs from today and look forward to working with you on elevating this voice. And I know if I was Ibrahim, I know from Ibrahim, I'm supposed to remember to say this at the end of every event. We're meeting in Riyadh in December next year, and it won't be as large as this, but it will be pretty special. So please accept our invitation to come to Riyadh, and we hope that this issue will be very strongly on the table in Riyadh as well. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was fantastic. I will put in an extra plug. I've been to a UNCCD COP. I've never had more fun. So please do come.
It's like family. It's like big family. It's really nice. You can actually meet everybody because you can find them.
Which is the challenge here, right?
Yeah, but you still have fabulous things.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll close with that. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much to all the fabulous speakers. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.